So after watching Warfare and being very excited to watch this movie for a good amount of time now, I finally got around to seeing Civil War, and it was decent. Now I definitely want to preface this by saying I definitely enjoyed this movie overall, but it did feel like it was a huge missed opportunity for me personally. But before I get into that, I do wish to compliment this movie. First off, this movie is a well-made movie on a technical level. It's well directed and well shot, and certainly does do a good job with building up its environment and kind of the tension around there. There are certain aspects that do a good job with the writing in this world and how an event like this would play out, but only to a certain extent, and I'll get to that later. The characters in this movie were fine and decent for what they were. It's not a type of movie where you really need so many strongly written characters, not saying that in kind of a bad way, but just it's not a movie where you really think about the characters too much in my opinion. In fact, in my opinion, the most memorable character in this entire movie would be Nick Offerman's character as the president, which is really interesting because he only shows up a few times in the movie, once at the very beginning and once at the very end, but the way that his character is mentioned to by other characters in their conversation group does do a good job of building up his personality and what kind of person he is in my opinion, and I think that's something that is very well deserved. Alright, now it's time to talk about the biggest issue with this movie. My biggest issue with this movie is the fact that it just doesn't feel like it has that much social commentary to go on with it. Sure, they reference a few events that happened that led up before this war, but they don't really delve into the belief set of why these people are fighting or why they're divided in this manner. In fact, the subject matter and messaging in this movie was more to do with news journalism and more particularly war journalism, and that aspect of the movie is well presented, don't get me wrong, but in all honesty, why would you have that set in a civil war of America if you want to focus more on news journalism? In my opinion, this concept would offer a really good exploration of American politics and divides, and it feels like at the end of the day, all the message of this movie is it would be really bad if we got into another civil war, which is true, obviously, but I wanted something really more from this movie. Now going back to its messaging of having this more on war journalism and coverage and being kind of unbiased, that's a good angle to play up and certainly interesting to explore, but even though that is present in the movie, it doesn't feel like it's a major contributing part to this movie in my opinion. And another problem is that the characters, while although not terribly written, are just not all that interesting for me to care about. Anyways, this is definitely a decent movie and I'll watch it again, but it definitely feels like it left a lot of room for improvement, and hey, maybe I'll appreciate more of the message aspects on a second watch, but for right now it gets a little bit more generous 6 out of 10. Now on a much more positive note, I finally got around to watching the movie Drive, and I absolutely love this movie. Now to start off with, I found the story to be very well done. The story certainly does feel very familiar with a lot of aspects and setup and structure, but what really makes it stand out is the style put into it. A lot of this movie is very 80s themed, and it does this great job of communicating that overall vibe and aesthetic. The use of vibrant colors and certainly slower down tracks are very well done in this movie. There are a lot of very stylistic choices that make this movie way more engaging to me personally. The violence in this movie is so incredibly well done. A lot of violence in this movie can be incredibly stylized and very slowed down at points, but it really rides that fine line between slowing down to make it more impactful and slowing down time to make it more cheesy, and it really does a great job of making it feel so impactful whenever these events happen. All of the performances in this movie were absolutely perfect. Ryan Gosling did an amazing job with his performance, and his chemistry with the actress in this movie was incredible. Their dynamic and relationship is just so incredibly well communicated, it doesn't really take that much effort at all to imagine that they're in a relationship. And it's really fascinating because it's just communicated throughout this overall vibe. They don't even really speak to each other that much, but it really does a great job making them feel that they have a great dynamic with each other. The opening scene in this movie is incredibly intense and very well done and executed. There's so many other sequences in this movie, and they really managed to stick with me throughout the whole film, throughout the violence and action in this movie that's just so incredibly impactful. Not to mention, Bryan Cranston did a great job of helping him differentiate other characters that he's played, and he was a very great addition to this movie. Now overall, this is just a really great movie with a lot of great style that makes it feel as if it has its own personality, and I would definitely recommend people watch this, and this one gets a very strong 8 out of 10. So I actually like this movie a little bit more than I thought I would. Now although I really did enjoy this movie and I could definitely see myself watching it again in the distant future, it does have its fair share of problems that I will talk about that did affect my experience with it. But let's talk about what this movie did well first before we get into the negatives, and I just want to say that this whole segment is going to contain spoilers for the movie, so if you don't want to see spoilers, just skip ahead to the next movie. Now the aspect that I'll talk about first with this movie would be the horror elements. elements. This movie is very well presented on a technical level. It certainly has a nice style and look to it. It also has a very nice depth of field. The horror aspects in this movie are a lot more psychological and conceptual, which really managed to stick with me. So the premise is that the main character is trapped in the basement of the serial killer and he has to find a way to escape. And he gets calls on the phone from the ghost children that he killed beforehand, and they give him clues on how to escape and certain aspects that are in the basement that could help him. And the way that these calls are presented, it leaves me with something to appreciate and not appreciate about it. The first call is just the raspy voice of the child on the other end with the noise background, and it's so effective at being creepy, and especially the way that the characters are interacting with each other, it certainly leaves a lot to think about. But then on other calls, it just basically shows the ghost children standing in the room, and it really kills the effective experience of the call in the first one. I really do love the conceptual aspects when it comes to the supernatural elements to this movie. For instance, characters on the phone will say they forget their names and they're not really sure where they are and how they got there. It certainly does leave a lot to think about the mythos of this universe. I really enjoyed how they explored the daughter's supernatural powers of being psychic and being able to see things. The way that it was presented was very subtly, and it certainly leaves a lot to soak in. I also definitely appreciate the length of this movie. It's not too long and it certainly does feel very effective and not too long for its overall experience. The acting was pretty hit or miss throughout. Ethan Hawke was able to bring a lot of personality to this character even throughout the mask that he's wearing. It certainly is able to leave an impression on the film. The sister character in this movie was really hit or miss for me personally. At the beginning of the movie, she's very unconvincing. Throughout the end of the movie, she definitely got a lot more convincing, but there were two pivotal emotional scenes in this movie that are kind of ruined because of her performance, to be perfectly honest. And there are some other child actors and dialogue that's really unconvincing. The dialogue in this movie can be at sometimes incredibly clunky and unnatural. Now, although I really did enjoy the horror elements to this movie, there are definitely has its fair share of annoying jump scares throughout the film, and it becomes a lot less conceptual and just more in-your-face annoying kind of thing. I found the dynamic between the main character and the villain of this movie to be very watchable and interesting, and their dynamic and how they interact with each other. It certainly makes it a lot more watchable, and I'm glad they put that thought into it. There's one particular call in this movie where the characters explain to him not to go upstairs when the main villain leaves the door open because he'll just start killing him then. And the way that's presented certainly leaves you to think about a lot of images in your mind and what could happen. I don't really think I can say it right here, but it is very done conceptually horror. The main character does have a very satisfying arc throughout, and he's very watchable, enjoyable, and likable as a main character, even though his performance staggers throughout the film a bit. I especially like the scene between him and his friend's a ghost, and he's basically explaining to him at the very end of the movie. It's really something that ties the movie together, and it certainly is very well done. And then just some minor issues that I want to talk about. I found the very ending of the movie, the whole bait switch reveal, to be very kind of lame and uninteresting personally. Like, it didn't really serve any sort of real point to it. It was just kind of dumb and didn't really need to happen. And then there's the other aspects, as the brother living with the killer and being totally unaware what's happening in the basement, and the fact that it seems like the ghost children can interact with the environment inside of the basement but don't use that at all to attack the main killer, and it just kind of seems inconsistent. The score and the way that music is incorporated throughout this film certainly was hit or miss for me personally. I felt near the end of the movie the music they were using was not very well fitting at all, and it was kind of distracting and sort of took me out of it for a bit. There weren't really many other instances where I remembered it all that much, so it was kind of forgettable. Not terrible, but just something that didn't really stick with me. Oh yeah, and the fact that the main character is able to do all this stuff like breaking the guardrails off the window and digging a hole through the wall on the floor, and the main villain not realizing it all, is kind of something to think about. It was kind of weird, and I don't know, it doesn't really affect me too much, but it is something that might affect other people's experience. But then again, those aspects didn't really annoy me too much, and my rating would be the same without it. It's just something that's kind of the logical inconsistency, which I like to think about. Overall, this movie is effective at what it wants to do. So although I don't love this movie, I totally understand why people really enjoy it, and this one gets a little bit more generous 6 out of 10. And so the fourth and final movie that I want to talk about in this video that I got around to seeing somewhat recently was Wes Anderson's Asteroid City, and I really enjoyed this movie, a little bit more than I expected to. Now, the reason why I didn't expect to enjoy this movie so much is based off Wes Anderson's previous movie, or next movie after this, basically being The French Dispatch, and as you can recall, I didn't really love that one though that much. And my perception of this movie from what others I heard is that it was kind of in line with that movie, and some people thought of it as a lesser Wes Anderson movie. But after watching it, this definitely isn't one of his best movies, but it's definitely a lot stronger than The French Dispatch in my opinion. Now, for starters, there's the usual compliments to go around for a Wes Anderson movie. The hyper-stylized coordination and tone and style of this movie is pretty great. The cartoonish writing is incredibly well done. The comedic has a great personality to it. The editing is very phenomenal and very well done. I thought that everyone in this movie was great, did a really good job playing their characters. But what I really loved most about this movie was the kind of meta tone that it took throughout the story. The way that it uses this to explore its concepts and themes of the movie does a really great job with letting you think about it in a certainly interesting way. Not to mention that this movie isn't that long, it does a really great job making it feel nice and sweet. So it's not a huge commitment and it's definitely very watchable throughout. Now overall, this movie was a good showing by Wes Anderson and it's not too much more to talk about. It's nothing amazing, but definitely one of the better Wes Anderson movies in my opinion, so this one gets a 6 out of 10.